My name is Claire Johnson. I'm 25 years old, and this is the story of how one phone call changed the way I saw my family forever. It started on what should have been a simple night, my dad's 54th birthday. I had picked out a gift carefully, thinking it would finally make him smile. But instead of gratitude, I heard words on the other end of the line that cut through me like glass. "Oh, that wine? I gave it to your uncle." White right pointing backhand index. Before I tell you how that single moment spun my world upside down, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. I had spent weeks thinking about what to get my dad. He wasn't an easy man to please, never had been. Growing up, he was the type who rarely said thank you, and even less often said I love you. Still, a part of me always tried. Maybe I was stubborn, or maybe I was just that daughter who believed one day I'd finally do something right in his eyes. So, when his 54th birthday rolled around, I decided on a bottle of wine I knew he would love. Not just any bottle. I had saved up from my part-time job to buy it. It wasn't cheap, and for someone like me, still juggling bills and rent, it meant sacrifice. But I didn't mind. It felt worth it if it made him proud, if it gave us one evening without sharp words or distant looks. I remember wrapping it in a deep burgundy paper, tying it with a gold ribbon I bought at the dollar store. My hand shook a little as I taped the bow, not from nerves exactly, but from hope. I pictured him smiling, maybe even lifting me into one of those rare hugs he used to give when I was younger. That night, I drove to his house. The air was crisp, with that lingering bite of early October. I pulled up to the small ranch-style home where I grew up, its porch light glowing faintly. Through the window, I could see figures moving, family already gathered, laughter spilling out, the kind that made the walls feel too tight. I walked in, gift in hand. My uncle was already there, leaning back in Dad's favorite recliner, talking loud like he always did. My mother was setting plates, avoiding my eyes the way she often did when tension hung thick in the air. And Dad? He was sitting at the head of the table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said softly, placing the gift in front of him. He glanced at it, raised a brow, and without even pulling the ribbon, muttered, "You didn't have to." But I wanted to. God, I wanted to. The night went by in fragments, candles blown out without much ceremony, jokes flying across the table, my laughter too forced, my stomach too tight. He didn't open the gift in front of anyone, just pushed it aside like it was nothing special. I told myself maybe he was waiting for later. Maybe he wanted privacy. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing. His number flashed across the screen, and I answered quickly, hoping to hear something warm. "Morning, Dad," I said cheerfully, even though my throat was tight from not sleeping. There was a pause, then his familiar flat voice. "Yeah, about that wine." I held my breath. Maybe he was calling to thank me. Maybe he realized it meant something. "I gave it to your uncle," he said simply, like he was mentioning the weather. For a second, I thought I misheard him. "You, what?" "Your uncle likes that brand. He'll appreciate it more," he replied, almost bored. My chest went hollow. All the air in the room seemed to disappear. I stood there barefoot in my kitchen, staring at the chipped linoleum floor, clutching the phone so tight my hand ached. "Dad," I whispered, my voice cracking. "That was supposed to be for you. Don't make it a big deal, Claire," he interrupted sharply. "It's just a bottle." Just a bottle. Those 3 words hit harder than any argument we'd ever had. He had no idea how many nights I had skipped takeout, how many mornings I walked to work instead of taking the bus, just so I could afford that gift. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about wanting to be seen, to be acknowledged as his daughter, not as some obligation he tolerated. My silence must have stretched too long, because he sighed, annoyed. "You're too sensitive. Always have been." I felt heat rush up my neck. Memories flashed. Me at 12, showing him a drawing I was proud of, only to hear, "Not bad, but your cousin could do better." Me at 16, running track in the rain, glancing at the stands where he never showed up. Me at 21, graduating college, scanning the crowd for his face that wasn't there. And now this. I saved up for that, I finally said, my voice trembling but firm. It wasn't just a bottle. Then you shouldn't waste your money next time, he said flatly. Your uncle enjoyed it. That was it. That was all he gave me. I don't even remember hanging up. My ears rang, my hands shook, and tears blurred my vision. It wasn't about the wine anymore. It was about years of being invisible, of never being enough. I sank into a chair, the cold air from the cracked window brushing my arms. I thought about calling my mother, but she would only say, "That's just how your dad is." I thought about calling my brother, but he would tell me I was overreacting, that I should let it go. But I couldn't. Not this time. Because for the first time, I realized it wasn't just about a gift. It was about a truth I had been avoiding my whole life. My father didn't value me, and maybe he never would. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words until they carved themselves into me. It's just a bottle. And something in me shifted. I didn't know what my next step would be, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep chasing approval that would never come. That birthday call didn't just sting. It opened a wound that would change everything about the way I saw my family. The silence after that phone call didn't just sit in the room. It followed me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I hung up, my hands trembling, and stared at the empty box of wine sitting on the counter. It was just cardboard now, but in my mind, it felt heavier than anything I'd lifted in my life. His voice, his anger, kept echoing in my ears. You did what? I pulled out a chair and sat down, my body sinking like I'd been carrying 50 years of weight all at once. My son's reaction wasn't about wine, not really. That pause before he yelled told me there was something buried underneath, something old that neither of us had faced head-on. And that thought dug at me. I don't know how long I sat there before the phone buzzed again. A message. Just one line. You always choose someone else over me. The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. They weren't new words. I'd heard them in different ways over the years, sometimes from him, sometimes just inside my own guilty conscience. And now, they had found their way back to me like a wound torn open again. The next morning, I drove to the grocery store just to get out of the house. I wasn't even sure what I needed, maybe eggs, maybe milk. But really, I needed distance from that cardboard box sitting in the kitchen like a reminder of my mistakes. The drive was quiet, except for the old country station humming on the radio. But even the songs didn't drown out the memories. I remembered him at 12 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with his hands clenched into fists because I had chosen to go to his uncle's softball game instead of staying to watch him perform in his school play. He barely looked at me that night, his face pale under the stage lights, his lines rushed. When we got home, he didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just went straight to his room and shut the door. And here we were, years later, still cycling that same pain. I didn't buy much at the store. Just bread, some bananas, and coffee. On the way out, I saw someone I hadn't seen in years, Nancy, my old neighbor. She asked how my kids were doing, and before I could stop myself, I said, "They're fine." A practiced lie. My son wasn't fine. I wasn't fine. We were anything but fine. By the time I got back home, I knew I couldn't just sit and wait for him to call again. I texted him first. "Can we talk?" Not about the wine, but about us. The three little dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. My heart pounded like I was waiting for a verdict. Finally, his reply came. "What's there to say? You already said it when you gave it away." I stayed at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. There were 1,000 things I wanted to write, but none of them felt right. So instead, I put the phone down and let the silence speak for me. That evening, I cooked dinner, just spaghetti and garlic bread, but it felt pointless. I was cooking for myself in a house that used to be full of noise. When the kids were younger, would gather around the table, laughing, fighting over who got the last meatball, spilling drinks, complaining about homework. Now it was just me, a quiet kitchen, and memories that burned hotter than the sauce on the stove. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table. I couldn't eat. Instead, I thought about all the birthdays I might have gotten wrong. The times I'd bought him the wrong gift, or worse, forgotten to ask what he wanted. Parents don't like to admit it, but sometimes we stumble, and our children feel the bruise long after. Later that night, the phone rang again. This time, I picked it up on the first ring. His voice was calmer, but there was still steel in it. "Do you even know what that whine meant?" "No," I admitted softly. "I don't, but I'd like to." He didn't speak for a while, and I thought maybe he'd hang up. But then he said, "I saved for months. I don't have much, you know that. But I wanted to get you something special. Something that showed I cared. And you just," his voice cracked, "handed it off like it was nothing." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, tears sliding down my cheeks. "I'm sorry. I didn't think." "That's the problem, Mom. You never think when it comes to me." The line went dead before I could respond. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock. Every sound felt louder, sharper. My mind replayed every argument we'd ever had, every moment I might have chosen someone else over him. His words replayed in my head like a broken record, "You always choose someone else over me." And deep down, I couldn't deny it completely. When his father left, I leaned heavily on my brother, his uncle, for help. He was the one who showed up for baseball games when I couldn't leave work. He was the one who fixed the bike chain when I didn't have the patience. My son saw that. He saw me leaning on someone else, again and again. And maybe in his young heart, that turned into a story he never let go of, that I'd chosen his uncle instead of him. By morning, I felt worn out, but also more certain than ever. This wasn't about wine. This wasn't even about one birthday. This was about years of unspoken resentment that had finally boiled over. When the sun rose, I made a choice. I wasn't going to let another day slip by with silence sitting between us like a wall. If I had to dig up every buried memory, every fight, every forgotten promise, I would. Because old wounds don't heal by ignoring them. They fester, and mine had been festering far too long. I hadn't planned on hosting, but sometimes decisions make themselves. That morning, I called everyone, my son, my daughter, even my brother, and told them we were having dinner at my place. No excuses. I didn't say why, but my voice must have carried the weight of something unfinished, because no one argued. The hours leading up to it were restless. I cleaned the kitchen twice, set the table too early, then changed the napkins because the first set felt too plain. I kept checking my phone, half expecting my son to cancel. But by late afternoon, one by one, they started arriving. My daughter walked in first, arms full of flowers and that cautious smile she wears whenever she senses trouble. "These are for the table," she said, kissing my cheek. Her eyes flicked to my face, searching for clues. "You okay?" I nodded too quickly. "I'm fine." But she wasn't convinced, and I knew it. Then came my brother, carrying a pie from the bakery downtown. He made a joke about how he'd never been invited to anything so fancy and gave me a wink, like we were still the same siblings sneaking food in the middle of the night. Except tonight, the air between us wasn't light. It was thick, unspoken, heavy with history. Finally, the sound of tires crunching on the driveway made me freeze. My son stepped through the door with a six-pack of soda under his arm. He didn't hug me, didn't make eye contact, just set the bottles on the counter and muttered, "What do you need me to do?" My daughter's smile tightened. My brother cleared his throat. And just like that, the gathering began. Dinner started quietly enough. Plates filled with roasted chicken, potatoes, salad. The clink of silverware carried more weight than words. My daughter tried to lighten the mood, talking about a project at work, but every sentence she offered seemed to land flat, like stones skipping once before sinking. It wasn't until the second round of serving that my son finally spoke. "So," he said, his fork pausing mid-air, "are we going to talk about it? Or are we just going to pretend this is any other night?" The room froze. My brother looked at me, then at him, like he'd walked into the middle of a storm he hadn't prepared for. I swallowed. "We're here to talk. That's why I asked you all to come." "Good," my son said, leaning back in his chair. His eyes were sharp, but underneath them I saw hurt, raw and unhidden. "Because I'm done pretending everything's fine." My daughter set her fork down carefully, like even the sound of metal against porcelain might set him off. "Maybe we should." "No," he cut in. "I need to say this." He turned to me, his voice steady but edged. "You always said family comes first. But when it came to me, it never felt that way. You'd bend over backward for everyone else. But when I needed you, somehow you were too busy, too tired, or already giving your time to someone else." I opened my mouth, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish." His words spilled out faster now, like a dam breaking. "When I was a kid, I told myself it didn't matter, that I was strong enough, that I didn't need you to show up. But it did matter. Every time you chose someone else, it mattered. And when you gave away my gift last week, it just proved what I already knew." The table was silent. My brother shifted in his seat, guilt flickering across his face. My daughter looked down at her plate, blinking back tears. I wanted to speak, to explain, but the weight of his voice pinned me to the chair. Finally, my brother cleared his throat. "Maybe I should." "No," my son snapped. His eyes narrowed. "You don't get to say anything. You were always there, weren't you? Every game, every school event. You got to be the one standing on the sidelines while he jabbed a finger toward me, was too busy leaning on you." My brother's jaw tightened, but he didn't fight back. He just sat there, the pie untouched between us, like even dessert couldn't sweeten what was happening. I drew in a shaky breath. "You're right." My voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room. Everyone turned toward me. "You're right, and I can't take back the choices I made. I thought I was doing what I had to, but I see now how much I hurt you." My son's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "Hurt doesn't even cover it." His voice cracked, and for the first time that night, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who just wanted his mother to choose him. My daughter finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "We can't keep tearing each other apart like this." She looked from me to him. "We're family. That has to mean something." "Does it?" My son shot back. "Because right now, it feels like it means nothing." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I reached for him, but he stepped back. The rejection stung, sharp as glass. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "I came here tonight because you asked, but nothing's changed. You'll say sorry, but next time, it'll be the same story. It always is." His words landed like blows. My daughter wiped her eyes, my brother stared at the table, and I just sat there, my hands trembling in my lap. When he finally walked out, the door shutting hard behind him, the house felt like it lost its walls. My daughter whispered, "I'll go check on him," and rushed after him. My brother stayed behind, his pie still untouched, his presence suddenly too large for the room. "You know," he said quietly, "he's not wrong." I closed my eyes, tears spilling freely now. "I know." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was sharp, jagged, the kind that cuts deep. The food sat cold on the table, the flowers drooped in their vase, and all I could feel was the echo of a son's footsteps leaving, taking with him the fragile hope I'd carried into the night. And in that empty space, with the weight of everything unsaid pressing down, I realized something simple, painful, and undeniable. Sometimes gatherings don't heal. Sometimes they just remind you how broken things really are. The house was silent after they left, but silence never meant peace. It clung to me like smoke, seeping into every corner, suffocating in its stillness. My brother was still sitting at the table, staring at the pie as though it held answers. Neither of us touched it. "You should eat something," he finally said. His voice was low, measured, like he was afraid of breaking me with anything louder. "I can't." My throat was raw, my chest tight. "Not after that." He leaned back, folding his arms. "You know he wasn't wrong." "I know," I whispered. The words tasted bitter, but hearing it out loud, it's different. He nodded, his eyes shifting toward the front door as if expecting my son to walk back in. But the door stayed closed, the night outside swallowing any chance of that. Later, when the dishes were stacked and the table cleared, I found myself drifting into the living room. The flowers my daughter brought sat on the mantel, the petals already starting to curl at the edges. I sank into the couch, pulling a blanket over my lap though I wasn't cold. My brother followed, sitting in the chair across from me. His silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was heavy, loaded with something unsaid. Finally, he spoke. "There's something I've kept from you. Something I should have said a long time ago." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" He rubbed his hands together, staring down at the floor. "Back then, when you leaned on me so much, when I showed up at every game, every recital, it wasn't just because I wanted to help. It was because I knew if I didn't, no one else would. But it wasn't only that." I frowned, unsure where he was going. "There were things Mom and Dad never told you," he continued, his voice rough. "Things about the family, about why you were always the one carrying more than your share." The air in the room thickened. I shifted forward, gripping the edge of the blanket. "What things?" He lifted his gaze, and the look in his eyes made my stomach turn. "You weren't supposed to carry the weight you did. You weren't even supposed to be the one keeping everything together. That was supposed to be my responsibility. But they told me once, when you weren't around, that they trusted you more. They said you were stronger, and I let that stand." I blinked, stunned. "They said that?" He nodded slowly. "And I let it happen. I let you be the one everyone leaned on, even when I could have stepped in more. Because deep down, I believed them. I thought you could handle it better than I could. And maybe that's why your son feels the way he does. Because I didn't challenge it. I didn't fight for balance. I just stood there and let you drown." The words landed heavier than I expected. I felt heat rise in my chest. Not anger at him, not entirely, but at the years of silence that had shaped us. "You should have told me." "I know." His voice cracked. I was ashamed. It felt easier to pretend I was helping instead of admitting I was failing you. I stared at him, my mind reeling. All those nights I had convinced myself I was alone, all the weight I'd carried. I had believed it was simply the way life was. But now I saw it differently. Choices had been made behind closed doors, decisions I had no part in, truths kept hidden because they were easier left unsaid. Before I could respond, the door opened. My daughter stepped inside, her cheeks red from the cold. She looked shaken, her eyes glossy. "Did you catch him?" I asked quickly. She shook her head. "No, he drove off before I could reach him." She sank into the couch beside me, pulling her coat tighter. "But he said something. Something I think you need to hear." I turned sharply. "What did he say?" She hesitated, her lips pressed together. Finally, she whispered, "He said he knows things too. Things about the past. And he's tired of being the only one who remembers them." The room stilled again. My brother's head lowered, and my pulse quickened. "What does he mean?" I asked, though my voice wavered. She looked between us, her expression torn. "I don't know, but it scared me. The way he said it, it was like he'd been holding it in for years, and tonight was just the breaking point." I pressed a hand to my chest. The truths my brother confessed were heavy enough, But now the idea that my son carried his own secrets, ones I hadn't dared imagine, made the ground beneath me feel unsteady. The night dragged on. My daughter eventually fell asleep on the couch, her head resting against my shoulder, her breathing shallow and restless. My brother stayed in the chair, silent again, though this time it wasn't distance. It was exhaustion. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to my son's words, my brother's confession, the possibility of more truths waiting in the shadows. Every sound in the house felt louder. The tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the faint creak of the floorboards, as if the house itself carried secrets. By dawn, I was still awake. The first streaks of light cut through the blinds, casting sharp lines across the living room. I eased myself up, careful not to wake my daughter, and walked to the window. The street outside was empty, but in my chest, it felt like everything was crowding in on me. Behind me, my brother finally spoke. You can't keep waiting for him to come back on his own. If he's carrying something, you need to hear it, even if it hurts. I turned slowly, my hands trembling. And what if it breaks everything? His eyes softened. Then at least it's broken in the open, not in the dark. The words cut deep because I knew he was right. The longer we left these truths hidden, the more damage they would do. My son wasn't just angry. He was carrying something buried, and if it stayed buried, it would eat him alive. I stood there in the growing light, staring at the door he had stormed through, knowing that whatever lay ahead, there was no turning back. Because some truths, no matter how much we tried to bury them, refused to stay hidden. Because some truths, no matter how much we tried to bury them, refused to stay hidden. I stood there in the pale morning light, my hand pressed against the cool glass of the window, staring at the street where my son had vanished hours before. My brother's words echoed in my ears. My daughter stirred lightly on the couch, and the house felt less like a home than a vault, a place filled with things too long locked away. But the longer I stood, the more something inside me shifted. For years, I had carried everyone else's burdens, waiting for apologies, waiting for recognition, waiting for someone else to fix what was broken. That waiting had cost me more than I'd ever admitted. And now, standing in that gray stillness, I knew the truth. No one was coming to rescue me. Not my brother, not my children, not even the ghosts of my parents. The only choice left was mine. I turned from the window, the decision settling over me with the quiet certainty of dawn. My daughter blinked awake, her hair tangled, her eyes red-rimmed. She sat up, rubbing her face. "Did you sleep at all?" "No," I said softly, pulling the blanket from her shoulders. "But I think I finally know what I need to do." She frowned, searching my face. "About him?" "About all of it." By noon, I was in the garage, sifting through boxes I hadn't opened in years. Dust rose in clouds, stinging my eyes, but I kept going. Old report cards, yellowed photographs, brittle letters in envelopes that had never been mailed, pieces of a life I had once clung to, but no longer needed. My daughter hovered in the doorway. "Why are you digging all this up now?" "Because," I said, holding up a cracked frame, "every piece of this is part of the story they wrote for me, and I don't want to read it anymore." She tilted her head. "So what are you going to do?" "Rewrite it." I placed the frame back in the box, shut the lid, and for the first time in years, felt the weight of those memories lift just a little. That evening, when my brother suggested we drive out to look for my son again, I shook my head. "Not tonight," I told him. He looked at me as if I'd spoken in another language. "But he's still out there." "I know. And when he's ready, he'll come back. But tonight isn't about chasing. It's about choosing." His brow furrowed, but he didn't argue. Instead, he followed me into the kitchen, where I pulled out an old notebook I hadn't touched since my children were small. It was filled with lists, goals I'd written down when I believed I'd have the chance to pursue them. They were simple things: learn another language, take a road trip alone, start the small business I had once dreamed of. All of them had been set aside in favor of being what everyone else needed. Quietly, I slid the notebook across the table to him. Do you know what this is? He flipped through a few pages. It looks like your plans. They were, and now they are mine again. The next day, I made calls. I cleared appointments that weren't mine to keep, cancelled obligations I had been guilted into, and rearranged everything that had tethered me to routines that drained instead of fed me. With each call, a strange calm settled deeper into my bones. At one point, my daughter watched me hang up the phone and asked, "Isn't this going to make people mad?" "Yes," I said without hesitation, "but that's not my problem anymore." She laughed nervously, like she wasn't sure if I was joking. But I wasn't. This was my quiet revenge, not shouting, not slamming doors, not burning bridges in anger. My revenge was stepping out of the roles that had kept me small, walking away from the cages others had built, and doing it without fanfare. The opportunity for a test came sooner than expected. That weekend, my brother suggested another family dinner, a way to smooth things over. My daughter looked at me anxiously, waiting for my usual nod of agreement. Instead, I simply said, "No." The word shocked even me. It was clean, steady, not coated in apology or softened with explanation. Just no. My brother blinked. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I'm not coming. Not this time. Not anymore, if it keeps playing out the same way." "But they'll say you're giving up on the family." I shrugged. They already decided that years ago. I'm just finally agreeing with them. That night, instead of sitting at another table where silence roared louder than conversation, I went out alone. I drove to a small cafe on the edge of town, one I used to pass but never entered. The owner greeted me with a warm smile, poured me a cup of coffee, and left me in peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, I sat with my own company, and it didn't feel empty. The quiet revenge was sweeter than I imagined. Not because anyone else saw it, but because I did. Every sip of coffee was a reminder that I had finally chosen myself. Over the following weeks, the change became impossible to ignore. My son still hadn't returned, but I noticed something different in my daughter, an ease in her shoulders, a softness in her voice. One evening, she sat beside me and said, "It feels like you're breathing again. I didn't realize how much you weren't before." I reached for her hand. Neither did I. She smiled faintly. "Do you think he'll see it too? When he comes back?" "I think he'll feel it," I answered. "And maybe that will be enough." Not long after, my brother cornered me on the porch. "You've changed," he said, almost accusing. "I've remembered myself," I corrected. His jaw tightened. "And what about the rest of us?" I looked him squarely in the eyes. "That's for you to figure out. I've carried enough." He didn't like the answer, but he didn't press further, because he knew, as I did, that the quiet was louder than any argument. In the end, my revenge wasn't about payback. It wasn't about making them hurt the way I had hurt. It was about walking away without the chains they had wrapped around me, stepping into a life they no longer controlled. And the beauty of it, the part that made the silence sing, was knowing they would notice. They would see the absence, feel the space I no longer filled, and wonder why their control no longer worked. That wondering, that ache, was my quiet revenge.